fun to see folks showing up.
Yeah. For folks who are arriving, we're sitting in an awkward moment of silence to allow folks to trickle on into the event, and then we'll get started. All right, good evening. And welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Kay from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to host tonight's author event with Lindsey J. Palmer, launching her new book, Reservations for Six. She will be talking with Ashley Spivey, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Lindsey, Ashley, and the team at Wyatt Mackenzie for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways that you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and panelists and interact with fellow attendees. If you have a specific question that you'd like to have answered by either panelist, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Reservations for Six, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. That's the book, it's a book. You can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Ave stores, where you can purchase Lindsey's book and many others on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll drop the buy link in the chat soon. And as thanks for attending tonight's virtual event, we are offering 10% off the featured book. Enter coupon code GreenlightEvents10 into the coupon discount section at checkout online for 10% off. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Our interviewer tonight is Ashley Spivey. Ashley is a career nanny and social media activist. You might remember her from The Bachelor, but it's more likely that you've heard her being a vocal critic of the Bachelor franchise. She lives in Manhattan with her sleepy husband, Steve, and her dog, Jackson. Her online book club, Spivey's Book Club on Instagram, is her proudest accomplishment because she feels that reading now more than ever is so important. She will be speaking with our featured author, Lindsey J. Palmer. Lindsey is a writer, editor, and educator. She is the author of 3 previous novels, Otherwise Engaged, If We Lived Here, and Pretty in Ink. She worked in the magazine industry for many years, most recently as features editor at Self and previously at Redbook and Glamour. Nowadays, she's a senior editor at Brain Pop, an animated educational site for kids. After living in Brooklyn for a decade plus, Lindsey moved to Cape Cod with her husband and daughter. Her new book, Reservations for Six, is an entertaining and insightful page-turner about modern marriage and a tight-knit group of friends navigating their 30s and beyond. Lindsey is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with Ashley and with all of you. So please take it away, Lindsey and Ashley.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to start off and say I'm so honored to be leading this talk tonight with you, Lindsey. Thank you for having me. You know, I've just been such a big fan of your writing ever since I fell in love with Otherwise Engaged. This is all very full circle for me because the last book event I actually did was with Greenlight Bookstore right before the world shut down in an event with Kimmery Martin. So this all feels very surreal to me. But why don't I let you go ahead and start us off with a reading, and then we can start this talk.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Ashley. I'm so honored you're here with me. You're such a wonderful advocate for authors, so I really appreciate it. And I'm so excited to do this event with Greenlight. It's a little strange to do it from my room and not the actual bookstore as with my previous books, and to not live around the corner anymore from Greenlight, but I'm such a big fan, and I love visiting the store. So I have the book with me. I'm going to do a very short reading. That's just a couple of snippets from the first chapter. So the only thing you really need to know is that this book, Reservations for Six, features 6 longtime friends. It's 3 couples. And for a decade, they've been meeting for all of their birthdays. They celebrate at the same restaurant. And this opening scene is when the first of them is turning 40. Okay. The group ate family style. Everyone reaching over everyone else for bites and bottles and little plates piled with forkfuls of this and that. The waiters knew them, the birthday crew, and flitted about the table, refilling glasses and bread baskets, uncorking bottles of wine, and bringing out more sauces without being asked. An observer might be excused for thinking the friends didn't have much to say to each other, since few words were exchanged during this phase of the evening. In truth, no one felt the need to drum up conversation for conversation's sake. They were comfortable, at home in their little sextet, bellies growing fuller and heads fuzzier with good wine. Louisa took a break from her plate to sit back and marvel at her life. Sure, she was so sleep deprived, she could have used an entire year to catch up. And most days felt like a breakneck sprint, her to-do list stalking her like a sleazy creditor. But that was expected, given her demanding, thankless job at the school and her demanding, generally thankless toddlers. It also meant that she and Nathan sometimes went days without exchanging more than cursory greetings and kid logistics. Long gone were their days of romantic gestures and spontaneous dates. But despite all that, how lucky that Louisa had populated her life with such wonderful people, and that they'd built this chosen family, still growing strong through everyone's early middle age. Louisa settled her focus on her husband, perched over a napkin, scribbling notes. It had once made her swoon to watch his big hand wrapped around a golf pencil, his mind brimming with ideas that he simply had to get down right away. She patted his leg fondly. He flinched. She must have startled him. I love you guys, she said to the table, and was met with nods and mm-hms. Everyone was flush with food and drink and feeling sentimental. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead just a bit. No one at the table noticed when Nathan disappeared. His palms were sweaty and the room had started spinning. He knew he'd gone too far in trying to take the edge off and found his way to the restroom, mostly by instinct. The restaurant's layout was as familiar as his own home. He splashed cold water in his cheeks and forced himself to face the mirror. Vision a little swimmy, he struggled to bring his reflection into focus. All this love and friendship and celebration, it had become cloying, like a strong perfume in a small space. It seemed to Nathan like half the reason the group kept up these birthday dinners was so they could congratulate themselves on being such dear, devoted friends. When the ritual began, Nathan was turning 30, an age that had seemed so grown up at the time, with everyone else still coasting out the end of their 20s, ribbing him about his old age. Nathan had felt old, but in a mature, wise way. He'd felt optimistic too, looking ahead to years upon years of adventures, so much life ahead. But then it was like he blinked and was 40. 40. Half his life might have been behind him. Nathan saw his future laid out before him as a husband and a father and a worker bee, still scraping by on his salary of a non-tenure track lecturer, always being reminded by Louisa of his inferiority at parenthood, worn thin on time and energy, and meeting up a few times a year with these same friends to sit around the same table at Giorgio's, another decade gone by. It honestly felt like no future at all. Nathan felt sweaty, then chilled, then sweaty again. The whirring exhaust fan pulsed in his ears. The walls closed in. He reached into his pocket for a tissue, but found only the crumpled paper where earlier at the table, he jotted down a list of video games to try. He lurched through the door to the restaurant, pausing to steady himself against the wall. Then he spotted it, the behemoth of a cake, held by that waifish waitress Kimmy, and lit up with grown 40 candles. A math professor, Nathan was normally all for precision, but in this case, No. Birthday candles to match one's age was for children, not a middle-aged man whose life was so monotonous that the appearance of a cake was meant to count as grand excitement. Nathan wished the waitress would trip and send the cake flying. He yearned for escape. But all his friends were waiting for him. His wife was waiting for him. The thought made him cringe, but in the end, inertia won out. Nathan knew what was expected of him. He ducked in front of Kimmy's path and returned to the head of table just in time. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. His loved ones sang with the same enthusiasm as he and Louisa had last fall when Phoebe and Finn turned 2. How come people didn't age into a different birthday song, something less jolly and humiliating? Nathan grinned and bore it, right through the final line when the cake and its army of candles was plopped down before him, now his burden to bear. Make a wish, Abe called out. Louisa took Nathan's hand. Hers was clammy and hot. Shout it out. This was tradition, Mickey's idea originally. Her theory was that a wish kept secret got buried, like it had never been wished for in the first place. Whereas sharing the wish aloud with your friends was like notarizing it, welcoming it to the world, so it could be nurtured and nourished. So many of their achievements had started as shouted out wishes at this very table. Mickey's gym, Mateo's businesses, Amy and Abe's house, Louisa's promotion, Louisa and Nathan's twins, not that they'd wished for a pair. Nathan sucked in all the air he could manage, then blew with all his might, obliterating every last flame mocking his age. It was invigorating. For the first time that evening, he felt powerful and in control. He hadn't planned to say a thing, not here, not now, but he was caught up in the moment. So he drew in another breath, turned to his wife and blurted it out. Louisa, I want a divorce. That's the end of the first chapter.
I feel like if people haven't purchased this book yet, after that, they like have to, because that's just such a cliffhanger. It makes you like want to know what's going to happen next. Like as soon as I read that, I think I read for 3 more hours.
Thank you.
I just had to know what happened. If it's okay with everyone, we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully you and I will talk for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we will open it up to a Q&A. So if anyone has any questions that they want me to ask Lindsey, please put them in the Q&A, not the chat, and we will get to them after we have a little discussion right now.
Great.
So, Otherwise Engaged came out in 2019. Is Reservations for Six something you've been working on before that, or was this a book born out of the pandemic, a pandemic baby, if you will? Let us know how it came into the world.
Yeah, I did start it before the pandemic. I had actually been working on another book, trying to write another novel, and it just wasn't working. I had about 150 pages and I was trying to resuscitate it and sort of, in denial that it wasn't working. But I did find that there was one character that I kept being excited to write about, this character, Louisa, who was going through a divorce and had young children and had a very stressful job at a school. And I just got excited writing those parts and not the other parts of the book. And I eventually said, you know what, I'm going to scrap what I have so far and start fresh, which is not unusual for me, to have to go through a couple iterations before, coming upon something that sticks, and really thought about, I want to explore her story. And it was also, I had reached kind of a phase in my life by my mid-30s where unfortunately, it was less of getting, wedding invites and more, hearing about long-term couples or marriages that were splitting up. That was sad to see in friends or acquaintances, but, it was also kind of interesting to see not just how that affected the relationship itself, but the sort of ripple effects of that in a group of friends. And so, I had this character I was interested in, and I thought about, what would it be like in her tight-knit group of friends? So that was sort of the impetus of this. And I had written part of a draft before the pandemic, and then, did nothing for several months as I, tried to balance having a job and no childcare and all of that. But then came back to it and was really excited to come back to it. And I think in a way it was kind of nice to take a break from something and, then have sort of fresh eyes to it. And yeah.
So I love the progression from everything going to hell during an engagement to everything going to hell during these established marriages. Is this something that you've witnessed in your friend groups or during the pandemic, and that made you want to write about that more? Or is this just completely born from your brain?
I mean, as I said, I did start it before the pandemic, but certainly, I am interested. I'm interested in relationships, and I'm interested in, the points of tension, like what are the outside or, internal forces that are going to cause people and relationships to come to a kind of breaking point, or, what's going to happen when you apply stress. Like that's interesting to me. And so, yes, you're right. Otherwise Engaged came out of my experience of, planning a wedding and that whole experience, and thinking about, a time in my life talking to a lot of people who are engaged where, that's a period that is sort of sold, I think, as, the most wonderful period in a relationship. And I think in some ways it can be, and in other ways it can be quite stressful and overwhelming. And so, now several years later, and, just witnessing friends and all kinds of situations, I sort of wanted to take that same sort of eye to a later point in a relationship.
I just thought that was interesting because it's something I'm seeing within my friend groups too. So I just thought it's funny.
Yeah. And, definitely witnessing, and this was part of me thinking about this too. Most couples share friends. And so what happens when the relationship splits up, and who gets which person, or do you all remain friends? And what does that mean? And I've certainly experienced that with my own friends, and also just heard about it through other people. And way back, my first job out of college was working at Redbook, which was interesting as like a 22-year-old, because that magazine, which no longer exists, but, was directed towards women in their 30s, 40s. And I do remember working on a story that at the time had no relevance to my life, but that divorce was contagious. Like there was a statistic that, if a divorce happens in a friend group, the likelihood of divorce goes up among the other couples. And it's sort of exploring why that is, like, couples that might have kind of complained together, but in a way where like, this is going on in my marriage, is this going on in your marriage? That's one thing. But if one couple then decides, okay, all that stuff I complained about has sort of reached a breaking point, everyone else maybe starts questioning, like, okay, well, I might have that going on too, but to a lesser degree, or, I just have a different, every relationship is different, and what you can tolerate and what works and what doesn't. But I always had that in the back of my mind, even, at the time at age 22, I wasn't thinking about that. I didn't have very many friends in marriages, never mind, long-term relationships, but, it makes sense to me. That intuitively makes sense to me.
Yeah. I'm not going to talk about the pandemic this whole entire time, but this was one question I had.
That's why we're on the screen.
Right? Does this book take place in a pre-pandemic world or a post-pandemic world, or just like a world in which the pandemic never happens?
That's a really interesting question generally for fiction. And I'm sort of curious how the next, few years will pan out. I would say a pre-pandemic world, because there is reference to, our wonderful previous president, like there is sort of critiques of him. And I once the pandemic happened, I thought, okay, it's not a book that deals a lot with like current events, but, that I could situate it, before 2020, because it just didn't make sense given the narrative to incorporate that. And, but as I said, I've read now a few pandemic novels, and I'm sort of curious how people are going to incorporate that in fiction if their books are not like directly dealing with a pandemic. So we'll see.
And there won't be any spoilers while we're talking, but I do think that's interesting, just the way it ends. Like, I'd love to see a sequel. Just to see what happens.
And part of it, honestly, I did find it sort of, I don't know, escapist in a way, once the pandemic started, to be writing about friends going out to dinner together and like that kind of celebration, because that kind of celebration stopped for a while. So I hope, whether we enter another wave of this or not, that's kind of a fun thing to read about, if you're at a point of going out to dinner with your friends now or not.
So this is your fourth book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us, was there anything different about writing this one? Is there anything you wish you knew now when you're writing, when you had been like writing before, like how do you think this book made you grow as a writer?
That's a good question. I mean, as I said, I think like my state of life and like life stage affects what I'm interested in writing about. So, now as someone who is married and has an almost 5-year-old, I mean, I'm interested in people in long-term relation. I mean, I'm interested in other people too, but, writing about that in a way that maybe I wasn't a few years ago. But I always love coming back to, and I love reading books that have multiple points of view. Like I always find that really interesting. And that was something that I did with my first novel, Pretty in Ink, which took place in an office place. That was really like the main character. And it was sort of like every chapter was actually a different perspective. And there's 6 characters and you hear from them. And then a couple other minor characters off and on. And so that's actually the opposite of what you're asking me, which is that was me returning to something that I had done before, but I really love writing like that. And I love books where you're like, okay, this is what I think of everything going on. And then suddenly you're in someone else's perspective and you're like, oh, now I have a totally different view of it. I mean, practically, I would say when I lived in Brooklyn around the corner from Greenlight, I always just wrote in coffee shops, which I really love doing. Like I sort of attribute it to like growing up with 2 brothers where I feel like there was always background noise that I really like that, and I feel like I can kind of half tune it out and half listen in on people's conversations. So obviously that, stopped once the pandemic hit. But now I'm going back a little bit more to, libraries and coffee shops. But I did somewhat see like, oh, I understand why people want more solitude because I actually was, focusing a little more, but I missed, eavesdropping into the conversations of the people next to me, unless they were like the people talking about cryptocurrency, which I feel like somehow in Brooklyn coffee shops is everywhere. You can't avoid it.
You mentioned this before, but you really enjoyed thinking about Louisa's storyline, and that's kind of what made you start focusing more on this book. Is there a character that you identified with the most? And then also, who was your least favorite to write, or who was the most annoying for you to write?
That's a good question. I mean, so Louisa is the character where her job is very much pulled from my experience. So I spent several years teaching in a public school in the Lower East Side, 11th and 12th grade. And it was kind of similar to the school in the book, which is, the kids were great and a lot of the staff was great, but the administration was pretty toxic and stressful. And so I had fun like bringing some of that to life and adding that to the storyline as just like another thing that she's dealing with in addition to the stuff going on in her relationship. But I would say like less so than other books, like the characters are not really based on my own experience. It's more sort of me, having conversations with everyone I know in a relationship and hearing all of their, different issues and what has been a source of stress or a source of conflict. I would say, I know the character Nathan, whose perspective, you heard that little snippet of, I think is generally, this is not giving much away, is kind of perceived as the least likable character. But personally, I think that's kind of fun to write. Like, and I did that with the last book too, where like one of the main characters has written a novel that in some ways is very offensive. And like, that was fun to write those snippets of the book. Like it's kind of fun to write a villain in a way, but I don't know. I mean, I also like, I think part of creating characters is that you have to empathize with them and you have to take on their perspectives. Hopefully, if you want to, make them realistic, real people. And so, I like all of them. They feel like my friends.
Right. I definitely felt like after the book was over, they were my friends too. And I felt myself kind of figuring out like who of my friends was like each character. I always think that's fun to do whenever I'm reading. Yeah. So this was something you warned me about before I started reading the book. This book does tackle infertility. Why did you want to include this storyline? Did you feel like, you had people around you that you could talk to get like a great perspective on that? yeah, just why was that important for you to include in this novel?
Yeah, and that I'm glad you said that, because I feel like, people who are going through something, sometimes you want to read about that, and sometimes I think you don't. So, it's important to know that. Yeah, I mean, I have known a lot. I have a lot of close friends who have dealt with infertility, and so it's something that I have heard about, through close friends and not for years. And I feel like, I think part of it is the older people are, as they are having kids, that's more of an issue. Or maybe it's just also that, by the time I reached an age where I was having friends trying to have kids, it's a lot easier for some people than it is for others. And, I again know from having read a lot and talked to a lot of people what kind of strain that can put on a relationship, as you, the same way that if you're not on the same page about having kids or aren't sure, it's a major part of a lot, if not, most relationships eventually. So when I was thinking about what the main conflicts would be in each relationship, that felt like one that would resonate with a lot of people.
I have to say too, like, there was no reason for you to worry at all whenever I was reading.
Okay. I mean, I don't know, you speak very openly about your experiences, but I know it's been hard at certain times. So I feel like some people don't want to read about that.
I will say you handled it very well. And so I feel like that isn't something people should be concerned with. Like, I think once they read it, that it will make sense. Like, if you've been through that, I mean, it almost seemed like you've had experience with it. That's how well you dealt with the issue. So I just want to say thank you for putting that in there, and like talking about how it can be a big issue in marriages, and it can be something that really affects a lot of people. So thank you for handling it the way that you did.
Oh, thank you for saying that. By the way, I'm seeing your dog in the background who's being very adorable.
I think he was going to show up. He's been over there this whole entire time. He was sitting right here in the beginning, so I'm glad he moved. Do you and your group of friends have a birthday ritual?
I don't. And I mean, I wish I did. I feel like honestly, it was like a device that I came up with that I thought would be, an interesting way to bring dramatic scenes to life, and that would be a touch point. If there are 6 of them, it could be 6 scenes. The only thing that has come close is many years ago when I lived in New York, friends of friends started a supper club, and it was every month, and someone would be in charge, and they would pick a cuisine, and it was very nerdy in a fun way, where they would like have a whole PowerPoint presentation about that cuisine. And it was like a loose enough group of friends that you would show up and you wouldn't really know who was there. It wasn't like this, where it was the same people. And, so you would meet new people. But I think it maybe lasted less than a year. We weren't incredibly committed to it. But yeah, this would be fun. I will say my husband and me have birthdays that are one day apart. So I guess that's like a birthday ritual that, the first year we were dating, it was very exciting. And we planned 1,000 different birthday things. And by the end of the weekend felt like, I don't know if you remember Berenstein Bears, Too Much Birthday. Like, this was too much. And since then, it's his birthday and then my birthday. And so sometimes I feel, not lately, but it's like a big night for his birthday. And then it's like, what about my birthday? So birthday conflict, but mostly it's fun. Joint parties over the years.
I love the idea of supper club. I actually tried to have all of my friends do that as well.
Okay.
But I was the only person who ended up cooking for it. Whenever we tried to go to like the next people, they all just ordered in, and it just didn't go anywhere.
They were too intimidated by your cooking prowess, I guess.
I like to think that. Without giving anything away about the ending, do you see a future for any of these characters? Like, if you could write a sequel for any of them, who would it be for?
Someone actually asked me about this last night at an event, and I hadn't really thought about it before, but I feel like when I'm done with a book, like I'm done with it. I feel like I'm not thinking about like what's happening after, which is not to say I would never revisit it, but I don't know. I feel like I was happy with, I think endings are hard, and I'm proud of this ending. I think I was sort of, and again, without giving anything too much away, like I'm not someone who likes to sort of tie things up into a bow. And I feel that way as a reader too. Like, I think it's kind of fun to have it be ambiguous, but like, that's the end. I don't know. I think it's unlikely there will be a sequel.
The character I was really hoping for a sequel is Mel, Mickey and Mateo's daughter.
Maybe, because she's sort of, she's kind of like a side. So yes, what's her future? Yeah.
Just to see like what happens to her life after everything in the end.
Maybe. I'll get back to you.
If this was optioned by Reese Witherspoon, who do you envision for the cast? And would you like it to be a series or a movie?
That's a good question. And I have spent some time, well, I'm not great at casting. And there is some interest, which is fun. So we'll see. But I think a series, I feel like, I don't know if it's just, the people I know, but I feel like TV feels more compelling. These, like something about like sitting down and committing to a movie feels like hard. And then you end up watching like 4 episodes of a show anyway. So I don't know what that like mental block is, but the format of this where they keep coming back to, the same place to celebrate each person's birthday. I think, a series would lend itself well to that. But I don't know. I'm not good at casting. If you have any ideas, you can share them.
Like I said, I kind of was thinking of my friends.
Oh, okay. So you can just cast your friends.
Yeah. So in my head, I just had my friends the whole time, but I'll have to like think of who I would cast for it. Okay. I know that there are people on Instagram who always do wonderful castings for books like that.
Okay. All
yeah.
Right.
What do you hope people take away from this book after they read?
That's a good question. I mean, something that I feel like in any book I've written that I've explored is like, I don't know, the value of different kinds of relationships, because even though this book, I think in a lot of ways really is about these marriages and sort of how they're perceived from the outside versus how they are on the inside and where the overlaps are, it's also really a book about friendship. And that felt really important to me because it's like, nobody's romantic relationship is perfect, but even if it is, like, there's so much I think that these characters get from their friendships that's different and that's complementary, or that, when they're having a hard time in their romantic relationship, that they're leaning on friends in various ways. And not to say that, those relationships are perfect either. I think a lot of the conflict that's explored is in the friendships too, but I don't know. I think part of, bringing to life characters that are full and hopefully realistic people are sort of exploring those different relationships and what they get out of it. Beyond that, what do I hope people get from it? I hope they enjoy it and hopefully see some of their own experiences in it. And if not, that they can empathize with different experiences. I mean, that's my favorite kind of book to read. I mean, I love like a well-plotted story, but I really am drawn to books where I just care about the characters and their internal thought process and shedding light on an experience that's either familiar or not, but if it's not, it like feels familiar because of how it's portrayed. So I hope that I have captured that in some small way.
I know that after I read it, one, I want to start some sort of birthday ritual with me and my friends. It also made me want to check in on my friends, just because I feel like, people don't get together as much as they used to.
Yeah.
And just to like see like, hey, how is everything in your marriage? Like, how are y'all doing? But also it made me just want to like appreciate Steve more.
That's good.
Yeah, appreciate our marriage more. So I feel like it definitely had the intended effect. people love book comparisons. Like I know on Instagram, whenever I'm recommending a book to people, it always helps if I say, if you love this, then you will love Reservations for Six. I know in my head, I felt like this book was very similar to The Interestings. So I don't know if like you have in your head like a comparison that you always tell people, like if you love this, then you'll love this.
Yeah, and that's a great one that I remember reading that in an era where I was like on the elliptical, and I read it on the elliptical. Meg Wolitzer, yeah, she's great. It's like the old friends from the arts camp, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I read J. Courtney Sullivan's most recent novel, is it Friends and Strangers or Friends and Lovers? I feel like they're Friends and Strangers, I think. It explored a lot of, even though it's not a group of friends, it's a relationship, but it's the same kind of life phase, and felt very kind of a similar vibe. So I always think of that. And I think of Emma Straub's books. I feel like also do a really wonderful job of talking about marriages and friendships, like, and career. It's sort of like, you get the full, picture of a person's relationships. So I mean, I aspire for my books to be like theirs. I'm not to say that they necessarily are, but that's, people, I think of those kinds of stories. And then, to go back to TV, I'm not sure that I was inspired. I think I was inspired by this. I don't know if you ever watched the series Friends from College.
Love it.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. And the opening sequence shows the table, and I think it starts like where they have like red Solo cups and it's pizza from college, and then slowly it ages up and it's like eventually someone's wedding shower and the wedding and a baby shower, and like you see the table as they're getting older. And so I think of that because it's the same kind of thing. It's like the touch point of this longtime group of friends and their various dramas and relationships. So that's a TV show, but it feels similar.
It's very similar. And I was actually so sad there's no more seasons of that show.
I know.
Before we go to the Q&A from everyone else, make sure y'all get your questions in. Is there anything else you want people to know about the book that I didn't get to in my questions, or something you really want them to know before they read?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think, I guess I would say like the reading that I did sort of sets up the scenario, but I think, I don't know. Each chapter is short and told from a different person's perspective. So I think that in a way is I don't know, if you're just wondering what the reading experience is going to be of the novel, I think, it's getting these little like snippets of this is what's going on with this person in this relationship. And then it sort of like turns a few degrees each chapter to get a different perspective. So I don't know if that's something that people need to know, but that's just like, I'm not sure how much of that was conveyed with what I was reading, which was more of sort of a setup of like, here's the scenario and everything kind of, unravels from there.
And it's very easy to keep track of the characters. Like, I don't feel like it jumps back and forth too much. Like, it's very easy to keep track of them. So if it's okay with you, we can get to the other questions.
Sure.
Okay. This is from Shannon, and she says, is having a visual image of the characters in your mind important to you before you start to write, or do they develop as you write?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say a visual image is not important to me, and really even an image. I know some people are big like planners and have everything sketched out and figured out about characters, and I'm not like that at all. I mean, as I said, I had this idea of Louisa beforehand because I'd been writing about her a bit, but I feel like I really get to know the characters as I'm writing them. And so that's every component, physical, but also just what they're like. But then I think by the end, I do have an idea, at least vaguely in my head. I think that's maybe why casting them is difficult, because as soon as you think of, an actor, and I feel this way. I don't know if I've had this experience also where you read a book and you love it, and then you watch a movie or a show version of it, and it's jarring sometimes when, whoever's been cast does not match who you had in mind. But, I guess if it's done well, it like brings another perspective to it. But no, I wouldn't say that I had that originally in mind.
So I'll wait for some more questions to come up, but in the meantime, is there anything that you're working on now that you can tell us about?
Sure. I mean, I'm in the very early stages of writing a novel that actually takes place on Cape Cod because, I moved here semi-recently. And this one actually focuses mostly on the relationship of two sisters. And they both have grown up here, and one of whom has pretty much stayed here, and another one has moved away and is as an adult moving back for the first time. And it's kind of, they've always had a sibling rivalry, and it explores their relationship. That said, I feel like I often start writing something and then nothing happens with it and I move on. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. We'll see if it continues.
Do you ever go back to those ideas?
Sometimes. I mean, as I said, like I sort of pulled, Louise out of this. When I was teaching, I had written almost a whole draft of a book that took place in a school, like entirely. It wasn't like, it's snippets of this book. And I just, it's funny, like if I've gone back and looked at it with some perspective, I can see like that it would only interest an English teacher teaching high school. It was very much like I was just kind of, immersed in that experience. And so that's what I was thinking about. And so I think I, probably pulled snippets of that to put into this character in this book, but not, I wouldn't, yeah, I think in that way, like kind of pulling maybe what works with some distance and some understanding. Yeah.
Do you think you're done writing New York?
I don't know. I mean, probably not. No, I mean, it's so funny. After I wrote my second book, my first two books took place in New York. My editor at the time was like, what are you thinking of writing about? And I described, another idea that took place in New York that was otherwise engaged. And he was like, well, what if they go on a trip? Like, he was like, there are so many books that take place in New York. And, I was like, I think I'll keep them in New York. I mean, it's such, it's such a great place. There's so much fodder, even though there are, and I read so many books that take place in New York because it's fun. And getting the references of, what block they're on or where they're going, there's a lot there.
And you'll never run out of locations here.
Yeah, right. I mean, the micro neighborhoods, you move like 5 blocks and it's totally different stuff going on. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. I don't know if we want to wait a little bit longer. I can talk forever. But I'm sure you have things to do tonight. Thank you so much for talking with me. I cannot recommend this book enough. Y'all have to pick it up if you haven't yet. I will be promoting it on my Instagram lots. I hope everyone will read it. And again, thank you so much for asking me to host this tonight. It is such an honor. And I will always be here to promote your books.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you, Kay and Greenlight. This has been wonderful. And I appreciate everyone who logged on to hang out with us.
Thank you both. Yep, that's a book. That's a book bite. It's a physical breathing book. Thank you, Ashley, for hosting. And I really appreciate what you do to support books and authors and bookstores and readers, because thank you in the chat. We need readers, not just bookstores, but when we say community and yet we're not able to come together, that's exactly what we mean. So it means a lot for anyone to be able to use their voice and their platform online to be able to say, read this book, support this author. And that's exactly how people like Lindsey and many other authors are able to continue to do their work, is for people to support authors. So thank you. And someone just said, I'm on chapter 24. I love it so far.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who came tonight. Oh, I love the sound of Cape Cod idea. Love books about sisters. Yeah, I mean, you're right, Lindsay. Like, you can always get involved in a book that is taking place in Clinton Hill, and you're like, yeah, I'm like right down the block. But excited to see what comes next for you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everyone who attended tonight. And you can buy tonight's book, Reservations for Six, on our website with a discount code for 10% off, Greenlight Events 10. We ship anywhere in the US, so New York or Cape Cod or anywhere. Or stop by our stores. We are now open until 9 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good night.
Bye.